Good morning everyone and welcome to episode 4 of our live group webinars. I'm Katie Lowe and today I'm making my debut as your guest host, so thank you for joining us. As always, this webinar will be available to view afterwards, so check out our YouTube and LinkedIn channels in the next couple of days. Links are also below and you'll be able to watch the bits you might have missed. I've got some familiar faces with me today, Toby Lewis, our CEO, and Bruce Rose, our Head of Content. Morning both. We're asked on a daily basis by our clients, peers and colleagues why we're changing the way we run events, how we make them future-proof, and most importantly, how does all of this strategy translate into getting started and creating a digital solution? So, you're going to be hearing from us about the new normal, defining objectives and tailoring content, and delivering a successful digital event. Please don't forget to keep asking questions throughout the webinar. There's a Q&A box just underneath this window and we'll get to as many as we can during the live Q&A session. I'm now going to pass over to Toby, who's going to be talking about the new normal and preparing for the unknown. Toby, over to you.
Thanks, Katie. One of our key objectives over the last decade has been to push our digital capabilities and that of our industry. And with the coronavirus putting a halt to large physical events for the foreseeable future, we find ourselves in the relatively unique position of having a digital solution already deployed. The COVID-19 pandemic seems to have caught the wider industry unawares. The short-term effects have clearly been a shock to the system and will have a significant ripple effect on how events are run in the future. Well, I want to say this: welcome to the new normal. For events going forward, adaptability will be key. Far beyond the short-term changes caused by lockdown, events will need to be agile in their structure and format if they are to go ahead and reach their audience. And the industry must remember, it is this audience that make our events. Their decisions shape our world. Without them, we have no industry at all. This is, of course, a time for great change. This is the penny drop moment, but it is not a time for anyone to panic or for events organisers to hang up their lanyards. More than ever, there is work to be done to safeguard upcoming events, develop new, innovative ways of working in the long term, and use this moment to build better events for the future. Now, we are uniquely positioned to offer a solution. For the last 45 years, Live Group has bounded countless hurdles faced by the industry and the wider world economy, developing ways around or through. And long before lockdown, we refined our digital infrastructure, whether through digital-first virtual events or hybrid events combining virtual and physical elements. While the coronavirus presents a new challenge, the initial focus driving our innovation had initially been created around two other issues: audience behaviour and climate change. Initially, we turned our attention to our audience. Across nearly 5 decades in the industry, we've witnessed delegate behaviour changing, and the one thing we can't control is the evolving nature and demands of the next generation of delegates. So we decided to put the audience at the core of every one of our content plans, which have increasingly included digital engagement. And by doing so, this has led to events which result in better content, greater audience engagement, which are more measurable against their objectives and present a better ROI for our clients. And secondly, we looked at the environment. Now, climate change has formed a large part of the group's strategy over the last 15 years. We recognise that events in their truest form are basically bad for the environment. Take all the air and land travel and the hotel stays for you and your delegates, the equipment storage and transport, not only to mention the huge temporary structures which often get destroyed after only a few days of use. We have been working to mitigate the environmental impact of our events by using first principles thinking and exploring in detail the use of remote audience engagement technology to help guide our clients confidently into the digital space. By improving the virtual suite available to our clients, events which delegates can choose to attend remotely, online, at home, in the office or in small groups have been deployed to support many physical events, massively reducing the overall event at the effect of the environment. And why, you ask, am I talking about delegate behaviour and climate change when there are more immediate problems afoot? Well, we believe the digital trend will only increase as these two considerations take primary focus in the coming years, after this current pandemic is behind us. Our advancements in tackling these issues have left us in a prime position to face COVID-19 crisis head on and ready to launch our flagship digital service. And we believe by getting a greater understanding around these core issues, the wider industry will be able to pivot and take control of these future situations just like we have. We're calling this flagship product our digital twin. The digital twin is our solution for clients looking to protect their physical events in the near future, and a product we believe will safeguard and improve all events going forwards. The digital twin is a considered schedule of online activities and content designed to complement your physical event. Its infrastructure wraps around your traditional event scenario, improving upon its strengths, mitigating its weaknesses, and ensuring that no matter what happens in the wider world, your event will go ahead. Now, we can't predict how the land will lie this September or even next September, but what we do know, it's always wise to hope for the best and plan for the worst. The digital twin provides an architecture which lets event organisers be agile with their event content, format and strategy. Adaptability is key here, as organisers may face a range of different lockdown parameters across countries and regions across this volatile time. COVID-19 has introduced several unstable factors into the business of events planning. Government restrictions, concerns over meetings in large groups, venue closures, and above all, the unshakable concern for personal health and physical safety. We believe each of these issues can be mitigated with the deployment of a successful digital twin for your event. And even when we can gather in larger groups, and our calendars will fill up with forthcoming conferences, it will be your audience who have the long-lasting concerns for their safety. And of course, as I've said before, they are the lifeblood of our industry. You can only overcome this factor by allowing your audience to choose how they attend your event, either physically or virtually, and how they engage with your content and one another. This, of course, is where the digital twin really comes into its own. And with that in mind, I think it's important that we address any concerns held by sponsorship or exhibition sales. The digital twin is underpinned by a robust platform and a new space that can be used to reach your sponsorship and exhibition revenue objectives. Now, physical events are not going to go away completely, and we'll see the traditional exhibitions again. But with the alignment of a digital twin, your sponsors and exhibitors will have an additional touch point with delegates over a longer period of time and with a broader range of content. If anything, opportunities for sponsors and exhibitors will increase with these changes. What we really find exciting is as digital twins are deployed more widely, more data will be collected about each event, leading to better reporting. Event organisers will be armed with more data-driven insight than ever before. And this means that future events will become more effective at both reaching their audience and achieving their objectives. The good news is that with all this in mind, we believe physical events will have a resurgence, but with a focus on quality. There's no getting around the fact that physical event audiences will need to be reduced, but the physical element will remain of great importance to those delegates who do their best work in the room with others and enjoy taking advantage of face-to-face networking opportunities that can only be provided at a live event. I see a future where different audience types, whether introverted, extroverted, time poor or time rich, can engage with an event in a way that suits them while still having a meaningful experience. It's time for the event industry to let go of the old ways and get a grip of the new. Change is upon us, there's no doubt about that, and now's the time to act and to innovate. For Live Group, we believe in the ethos behind the digital twin, a digital infrastructure that actually enhances your physical events and represents the future. And for the industry at large, we must be more proactive in owning our destiny and thinking of new ways, not just to survive in this new normal, but to thrive. Katie.
Thanks, Toby. Wow, that's some really, really useful insights into why we started planning for a digital twin, even if it wasn't for COVID, and what to do next. I've actually seen how clients are adopting the digital twin, and there is that penny drop moment when they're realising that it's not replacing their events, it's actually enhancing them. So it's about thinking differently and how we can thrive as an industry if we do. It all seems quite complex, and so Bruce, can you talk us through how to simplify this and how we can create a digital twin strategy?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we've been keen to do in this webinar series is to give people some of the tools that they may possibly need in order to do some of this themselves. This is a layer of thinking, as Toby alluded to. It is very much a strategy that we've deployed and is stuff that we're doing with clients right now. But we want everybody across the breadth of the industry to have an ability to engage in this level of thinking and to rethink the events that they're doing. And that includes agencies, it includes clients, it involves everybody who touches events in any way. Now, one of the things that Toby has touched on and that we've talked about is this idea of first principles thinking. And certainly when you go back to the previous webinars, it is something that I've mentioned. Now, I appreciate that there may be some of you out there that don't necessarily have a great idea about what first principles thinking is, and it may be a little bit mystifying. And so what I wanted to do before I go into what I think it takes to really rediscover these events is just to explain quickly what that means. And I think the easiest way of addressing it in the first instance is to think about what the opposite is, which is thinking by analogy. Now, our brains have evolved rather beautifully to perform quite well, and there is an awful lot of thought that an average person needs to do in a given day. And what we need to bear in mind is that in order to speed some of that thinking up, our brains engage in this reasoning by analogy. And what it basically means is you take something that is similar to your current situation and you use that as the basis for your next thought. So at a very kind of stripped down, simplified manner, when we think back to caveman days and there's a saber-toothed tiger chasing down some people, and then someone might see that and they think, oh, right, I'm like those people are running from that saber-toothed tiger, I should run from that. It's a survival mechanism. And it is useful in certain instances, but it can also be dangerous and trap you into certain ways of thinking. So on the slide right now, you see an example of how reasoning by analogy can be actually not necessarily the most useful thing. So in this instance, I'm running an event. I know that there are other events out there, and that my event and those events are probably quite similar because they're both events. And because their events have networking, therefore my event should have networking. Now, some of the time, this may be true. 90% of the time, it may be true. You can't necessarily know it's true until you engage in some first principles thinking. And first principles thinking is to ignore the analogy, is to not try and find commonality between your event and anything else, or your thought and anything else, but is to really take it on its own terms. So to re-examine the situation with first principles thinking, it'd be the case of, hey, I'm running an event and it's unique. And maybe it's unique in the message that it's trying to get out there, or maybe it's unique in the audience that's watching it. Regardless, it is unique in some way. And if your event doesn't have an element of it that's unique, well, there's probably a fundamental question about why that event is run. And that can be a hard question for some, but it's well worth diving into that thinking. Now, because we know our event is unique, well, then we can engage in the next bit of thinking, which is I need to take the fundamental truths, what I know about my event, my audience, all those things, and I'm going to use that to inform the decisions I make about how to run it. And then I'll be able to make a decision about networking. Now, on the Live Group website, there is an article penned by one Toby Lewis last year, which was all about thinking like a 5-year-old. And one of the things that kids are really, really, really good at is first principles thinking. And it's this idea of constantly asking why, the 5 whys. It's time for bed. Why do I have to get to sleep? Well, you're probably quite tired and you'll be grumpy if you don't get some sleep. Why? Why? And although it is, it can seem a little bit frustrating, and certainly as a parent, I can say it has got under my skin more than one time. What children are doing in these instances is they're just trying to get to the fundamental truths so that they can make their own inferences. It's a very clever way of thinking. And indeed, in Toby's article, which again I would encourage you all to read, there is a piece of research they did where basically children within relatively young age sets were marked as creative geniuses. And a key part of that is because they can engage in this first principles thinking, which leads them to discredit ideas that are just said by authority or said because similar things happening, and discover new truths and therefore new, exciting and creative ideas. Something that entrepreneurs like Elon Musk talk about a great deal. And indeed, the fundamental reasoning behind SpaceX was based on first principles thinking. What you need to bear in mind in circumstances like this is to almost resist authority. And so the antithesis of the child asking why is the parent saying, because I say so. And so when we're thinking about this in an event context, why have we run it this way? Well, because it's always been run that way, because I say so. And you really must resist this. Don't necessarily take anything as fact and go back to all those fundamental questions about why things are the way they are. Now, you're probably going to need a little bit of a toolkit in order to engage in this way of thinking. And so this slide takes you through some little quick tips to help you address any given element of an event or any problem that you may be thinking of and engage in some good first principles thinking. So firstly, clarify, what do I think? If I'm having a thought about my event, whether it's, hey, my event needs networking or my event needs a big opening plenary, what do I think and why do I think that? Is it a bit of information that's based on audience research, or is it just something that we've always done and we've not necessarily challenged it or examined it? So really clarify what it is that you think about a given situation or circumstance. Then challenge it. So once you know what you think, ask yourself, how do you know that it's true that you think that? Examine the evidence for it. And that kind of links into the observe. And you really want to go back to basically where these ideas have come from and why you may be thinking a particular way or the other. And then finally question, what if you're wrong? And therefore what the circumstances may be if you think differently or if your observations or intuitions are wrong. So for example, let's take this networking analogy. Okay, I think my event needs networking. I think that because my previous event had networking and it seemed pretty full. So I think I probably need it again. Challenge. How do I know it's true? Well, I was in that room and it did seem pretty full. So maybe that's good enough evidence base. Now, evidence-wise, I didn't necessarily measure the number of people in the room, and I didn't evaluate what people thought the networking. So maybe my thinking is getting a little bit weaker. And then what if I'm wrong? Well, if I'm wrong about this networking, and I could be actually excluding a large amount of my audience that don't necessarily want to engage in this. And that's not a nice thing to be excluded in an event. So maybe I should think about other things to do. And you can begin challenging that thinking and then go back to those first principles to examine it. Now, when we talk about events, we have referenced these 4 pillars. The first of which is your objectives, which I know for a lot of clients, certainly the ones that I've spoken to recently, this can almost be a bit of a pause moment where you say, okay, so what is it that your event's trying to do? And there's almost a little bit of silence as everyone almost realizes, oh yeah, that's actually a good question to ask. And it's well worth thinking. What are you trying to accomplish for this event? What organizational goals does it link into? What is your ideal outcome? I often ask clients to imagine 2 weeks after the event, what is their perfect world that their event has helped create? And if you don't have a clear idea about that, it's well worth going back to those simple reasoning objectives to think, okay, well, what is it that I'm trying to do? And once you have that, you can then let everything flow from it. Now, following from objectives, we have your audience. Who are they? You may think you have some idea about them, but it's definitely worth examining in greater detail. Why do they come to your event? What other events do they attend? Have they shared any of their views with you, whether through feedback, evaluation, or just having an informal chat at the end of a conference? what opportunities do they have to connect with each other outside of your event? Are they actually active on other communities that you're not aware of? Or is your event the big get together that many of them look forward to? And what expectations do they have for this event? When they think about your event, what springs to mind? What are the emotions? What are the things that they're thinking about? Because those become quite fundamental to how you're going to need to message a digital twin, a hybrid, a virtual event to that audience. Because for some of them, you're going to need to challenge their expectation. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you need to have a very clear idea about what their expectations are and remove from that who they are as people. After audience comes your message, and for many, this is going to be thinking about who are your speakers and what are they doing on stage, and that's quite key. And what you may need to do is go through every session, go through what you wanted to plan, and I try and get people to think about on a session basis, what are the 3 things you want people to remember from a session, and then from an event basis, what are the 3 things that you want people to remember from the event in totality. And those will differ slightly because sessions tend to be a little bit more specialized. Events are obviously a lot more generalized, but you need to have a very clear idea in your mind about what information the audience is going to receive that they're going to take away from your event, because that may inform how you run it. And something that we spoke about a few webinars back was this idea of passive versus active content. What is the stuff you want them to just digest versus what is the stuff that you want them to interact with and potentially help shape? And then finally, we come to legacy, which is really what happens to your event after it has ended. And it's not intrinsically like an event needs to have a long tail. There are some events that I've attended where once the day is over, it's been a great time. I'm not going to reflect on that event again. Very typical for sporting events, things like that. But it does happen with some kind of get together, idea jam kind of events where it's all about the creativity in the moment and it doesn't necessarily need a terribly long tail after it. There are some events that would really benefit from a long legacy in terms of hosted content, speaker presentations, continuing a community and a chat. And so you need to begin to ask this question of, what do I want my audience to do after the event has ended? And how do I want them to re-engage with my message? Now, regardless of how you do that from a content perspective, you're going to want to be thinking about the data that you generate from an event and how it will inform future events. Because what you will have done if you've delivered a successful hybrid event or even a physical event where you have a good amount of data capture is you'll have created a whole set of new data points to inform better first principles thinking going forward. You need to have a plan of what to do with that data, who's going to analyze it, who's going to draw inferences to help inform better decision making, and then when is it going to be used and how is it going to be tracked. So you really begin to think about, hey, yes, my event is ended, but my event has a legacy, and what do I want it to be? Now, in each of these 4 pillars, if you can apply some of that first principles thinking, you can begin to almost jot down an enormous ideas pad about what is actually possible for your event. And you begin to think outside of what your event was and then what your event could be. And one of the key things that's going to inform those possibilities is the fact that it's a digital twin, that there would be a whole host of website, hybrid, virtual options that are now able to be employed. So you're no longer mourning about the possibilities that have passed, but you're excited about what can be done going forward. I hope that is useful. I hope it gives you a little bit of the tool sets that you can use to apply this thinking and begin to build ideas and briefs around it. And I hope that you get started. And hey, if you need any help, we're here. Back to you, Katie.
Thanks, Bruce. And just going back to your asking questions and asking whys, I actually posted on LinkedIn a couple of days ago about a message that I wanted to say to the industry, and that was about staying curious. And I think that links really nicely back to your sort of asking why and why and why. Let's embrace our inner 5-year-olds. But yes, you're completely right. We now need to start thinking about what's next and how we start planning. So as an account manager, I speak to our clients all the time about the current situation we're in with COVID, running digital events, and also planning digital twins for the future. A lot of them feel like they've got a lot to learn when it comes to digital events. So if that's how you feel, you are not alone. Toby and Bruce have given some really great insights into all the prep work that needs to be considered when organising a virtual event or a digital twin. And I want to share with you some of the key things that I'm speaking to our clients about time and time again when it actually comes to delivering a virtual event. Hopefully, I'll be able to translate all of their strategic and clever terminology into how to get started and how to navigate your way through this very brand new and unknown landscape. So the very first thing you need to be mindful of is your audience. They're the ones you're running these events for, so don't underestimate the importance of their feedback and buy-in. Everyone receives and digests information differently, whether that's in a face-to-face environment or in a digital way. Investing the time to work out how your audience wants to be communicated to could prove to be one of the most successful things you can do. If you have time, scope out your audience's appetite and desire for a virtual event. It can be done through a survey or social media outreach, but you might be surprised by their reaction, and they could provide you some really valuable insights which could feed into your content and shape your day. If you can, use historic event data from your evaluations that you've done in the past. You can see how people have received your keynotes, your workshops, your networking sessions, and this might be helpful again with translating your current agenda into a virtual one. Lastly, always be aware of where your audience are. Take into consideration time zones and when your virtual event may be taking place. Remember, they're not all coming to the same place at the same time anymore, so you need to accommodate for this. Secondly, let's talk about your time frame. I don't know about you, but I find the lead times for face-to-face events can differ wildly. Sometimes we get weeks and weeks to plan, sometimes we get months, sometimes we get days. This hasn't changed for virtual events. When COVID forced us to cancel and postpone our events in the very short term, we were able to turn around a digital solution very quickly. But things have moved on, and now we're seeing two groups of clients and events. The first, who still have really urgent messages that need to be communicated to their audience. Even a pandemic doesn't have to stop this, and there are ways that we're able to translate your messages to get these out to your audience really quickly. Secondly, there are those that have time on their side. Whether the event is in a few months or towards the end of the year, we're able to reshape their agenda the way they communicate to a virtual audience. We can build a virtual event hub where delegates can network and connect pre-event. Your sponsors and exhibitors can engage and promote themselves, and pre-event materials can be uploaded, accessed, and engaged with. The key thing here is your audience still wants to be spoken to and engaged with. So whether you've got weeks or months, fear not, we do have a solution. Next, let's talk about the word that's on everyone's lips, budget. Virtual events can be incredibly cost effective, but there are no overhead costs with venues, catering, or travel. But it's important to note that quality sometimes does come with a price. Yes, there are free platforms out there, and yes, there are companies who can give you an off-the-shelf product, but just make sure it's right for your audience, for you, your messaging, and your timescales. If you're in doubt or it doesn't tick all the boxes, then keep looking and keep asking questions, and keep asking why. There are plenty of platforms out there which can deliver virtual events, and that's still true, but not all of them are easy to use or navigate. Some require an awful lot of initial setup time and effort. Some you have to pay for on an annual subscription, which sometimes isn't great for a one-off event. So just make sure you do your research and you understand fully what you're signing up for. Finally, we always want to manage expectations. And that's not just your expectations, that's your speakers, your audience, your exhibitors, and your sponsors too. Digital events offer an entirely different experience to face-to-face. You might find that not everything you had in your original face-to-face agenda fits into a digital environment, so be prepared that things might change. Your networking and coffee breaks, for example, may look very different in a virtual event, but there are fun and interesting ways that we can adapt these to keep your audience engaged and in front of their laptops. Your speakers may also not feel as comfortable in front of a camera as what they do in front of a live audience, surrounded by lights and cables. Give them time to get used to it. It certainly has taken me a while. What you can't actually see is I'm surrounded by 5 floodlights, various cables, and it is quite intimidating. It looks really cool as an output, but it does take some getting used to. It might also take some time for your sponsors to get on board and convince them of the ROI of a digital event. Again, there's heaps of opportunities here, and being able to provide data analysis from your event site will give them all the ROI they need. So, to recap, the most important things that you need to think about when planning your virtual event: your audience, how much time you have, your budget and what you're willing to spend, and managing your expectations. I hope you found that really useful. Like I said, there are hundreds of questions around digital events, but hopefully that gives you a starting point. Speaking of questions, we've been having loads of submitted, so let's get to them. So, Toby, this one's for you to get us started. Do you see venues being an important part of digital twins? Aren't you just stealing their revenue?
That's a good question. The answer is no. We're not looking to steal anybody's revenue. I think a well thought out digital strategy enables us to use potentially more venues. Certainly, if we are considering having a large group of a large number of smaller audiences around the country. I think initially when we're allowed to start meeting in small groups of 10, maybe 50, maybe 100 as we progress out of this situation, we can start using new and interesting venues rather than the same old big ones that we would normally use, and link audiences up around the country. In which case, I think it would be quite an interesting time for venues, and certainly ones that aren't the big normal ones that people travel to.
Great, thanks. And Bruce, doesn't this mean there'll be a lot more work for planners?
I think initially there's quite a reasonable likelihood that this is more work because it's more consideration, it's more things to keep in mind when you're thinking about what an event is and what an event should be. And I don't necessarily want to ignore that. It would be disingenuous if I had said, no, this is just as simple as planning any old event. It's not. There are more considerations because at the end of the day, it's a larger set of content. It's a more encompassing, engaging program of work. That does take work, and it takes planning time, and it takes all the things that clients go to planners and agencies for. However, I think it is a larger step because of where we are in terms of the world and how quickly COVID-19 has caused this disruption. And what we are asking a lot of people to do at the moment is make a big leap, but then subsequent leaps will be a lot smaller. It won't be a case of, okay, well, every time we're running out a digital twin strategy, it will require first principles thinking from the ground up, because that's why you have that legacy step, to take those learnings forward and to think about how you can build them intelligently into the event series as a whole. And so in the first case, yes, we are probably talking about more work, but that doesn't necessarily mean that work will always be a linear rate going up. And what I'd probably add on that is that's not a bad thing. We're talking about bigger and better, more engaging events. And yeah, it takes more work, but it's worth it.
Great, and just sticking with you, Bruce, won't we need to test this for our audiences before doing a full virtual event?
I think for some audiences, testing may be necessary, and it probably would depend on their audience type. So I think what I'd rather do is message around that and give people a sense of what it may be. So for example, if I was dealing with a cohort of people who were chief executives, typically people who are very time poor, who have no times for things not working, who probably won't necessarily engage until the day of the event itself, well then I'm probably not going to go to them and say, hey, we're going to do a test event, wouldn't that be nice? What we might do is offer a value proposition that works as the event in microcosm. So perhaps we can offer them a way to engage with a speaker before a talk on the day, which would take part as a live session in a post-lockdown future. Maybe some people go to that event, some people watch online, everyone gets to ask questions, and it becomes just a hint of what the event may be while still offering a layer of value. And that's quite important when it comes to testing audiences out for this. But for the majority of people, for those general audiences across the world, I think the main thing to keep in mind is that this whole situation that we're in right now is the perfect test case. It's the perfect environment for people to get used to this as a platform, and that's if you're engaging virtually. If you're engaging in person again in the future, it's much more of what it is and what it always has been. So I think don't worry too much. For most of your audience, this won't necessarily be a sea change, but when we go back to that first principle planning around who your audience is, why they come to the event, what their engagement tools are, well, then you can make a call about how to massage them into the event and into the new way of doing things.
Great. Thanks. Another question is, how do I sell this into my leadership team? And before I pass over to Toby or Bruce, I think it's really important to gather as much information as you possibly can when it comes to the strategy and your solution and your costs. Give as much information as possible to them and let them ask questions. It actually goes back to what Bruce was saying earlier about the why. There's going to be lots of doubts, there's going to be queries. This is all very, very new to people. So be prepared for them to ask you questions. And I think just let them ask those questions and make sure you're fully prepared with your answers and all of the research.
Yeah, just to
Toby,
add to
a
that,
question.
Katie, I think it's just to add to you, I think it's really important to get the senior stakeholders on board. Just adding to what you were saying, this is a different scenario, and there are cost variations. I won't call them cost implications. So if previously you've been paying for a lot of people to stay in hotels or paying for travel and accommodation or venue costs, and some of those are now mitigated, and the cost is being now transferred to some of the digital functions, then the stakeholders at a high level have to be able to see that, because they obviously look over all the budgets for an event, not just necessarily the event budget itself. So it is important.
Great. And Bruce, do you have any examples of those digital solutions?
I think probably in terms of generalities, yes. I think the main thing, if you want to see some live examples, is to get in touch with our sales team. It's that classic email that we've hopped on a lot about in these webinars, which is hello@livegroup.co.uk. Obviously, some of the work that we have done is for clients. It is individuals of them. It's not the kind of thing that we're going to be putting out publicly. But if it is something that you're interested in, if you want to see either if it's websites working or examples of previous productions and things that we've done, get in touch. We can walk you through. I'm sure, Katie, you've delivered many of these sessions over the past few weeks. What I would say is that one of the things that we've added to our Live Group YouTube page, and if you're not subscribed, please go and subscribe to it. It's Live Group Events on YouTube. We've just added a new video, which is essentially a walkthrough of the websites that we build in order to power both virtual events, digital twins, hybrids. It goes through all that functionality. It is we've built it Live Group branded to be a bit more generic, so we can explore the full range of possibilities. But that video really gives you a great idea about what we think is quite important in terms of the engagement that we do with people in a digital domain, and I think quite critically how we might perhaps build the look and feel of those sites in order to enable that. And it is a point I've made in previous webinars, is I know a lot of people think about virtual events, and that vision in their mind is still like a 3D venue and the website you have to click around, and it's not good. We need to think about user experience first, user interface first, and it's about shortening the barriers between people and content. And so go check out that video. It shows a whole host of things, including a few examples of production pieces that we've done, including our pretty much our full engagement tech service. So check it out. It's a great video. It's on LinkedIn as well, but it will get you started in terms of what we're doing and what our capabilities are.
Thanks. And Toby, what do you think the largest size of an event will be in the future?
Well, it really depends on how far you want to go. I think there's a not an infinite number of people that should be invited to an event, because it is basically around the people who are interested in your content. But we're working with a client at the moment who are potentially looking for 250,000 people to join a part of their digital event, and we can cater for that. So again, I think this really comes down to the digital strategy. Who do you want to get to? How wide do you want your message to be delivered? And then we can, numbers are not a problem. As long as everyone's interested in your content.
Great. And just sticking with that content topic, Bruce, do we treat content in the same way in a virtual event as what we do in a physical one?
I think no is the short answer. It comes to a question that's been posed to us kind of a number of times as well. What does this mean for my speakers? If I'm in an environment where, let's say we're doing some true digital twin planning and we have situation one where the event just proceeds as normal, people are coming to a physical event, they're watching a speaker talk, the speaker's going to prepare their talk in a very specific way. Whereas with good digital twin planning, we have to account for a scenario where maybe the speaker has to connect virtually, whereas the audience is there physically, or maybe both are there remotely. And we're then really asking speakers to build their session 3 times. It is a bit more work for them, but that is kind of a necessity here. What we find helpful, again, and I know I keep harping on this point, but it is very important, is this idea of first principles planning for speakers within their sessions. So to go back to some of that thinking, it's this idea of, okay, Mr. Speaker or Miss Speaker, what is the 3 things that you want people to remember? What are the messages that you want to share? What are the messages, what's the understanding that you want to get back from that audience? And how do you want those sessions to run and shape and feel? And then once you have those questions in hand, you can begin to rebuild their session for a digital first domain. I think there are some learnings, like certainly with anything virtual, my preference is that you have a high degree of audience engagement, that you're constantly reaching out to that remote audience at least once every 10 minutes, so they have the ability to feedback and feel like they're shaping the content. I also think you need to be a bit punchier with things like slides, make them very easy to understand, no big walls of text. The thing that I probably key into is that a lot of the rules of good presentation design apply both physically and digitally. The key difference is just that, and it comes back to that idea of an inertia, a lot of speakers have never changed their talks because they've always delivered them the same way, whereas the sea change moment can be an opportunity to rebuild things for the better and really examine why certain talks are delivered the way they are. So I think for me, no, don't treat content the same way. You need to treat it very differently, even just in terms of the fact that, hey, everyone gets the best seat of the house. There's no person at the back of the room with a poor view of the stage. The speaker has a lot more presence because they're front and center in everyone's viewport. But then it's just a case of ensuring that an audience member who is watching remotely, who has the option at any moment to leave their chair and go do whatever they want, feels engaged, talked to, and has the ability to connect at all times. You need to hit moments like that, otherwise you're going to lose people.
Yeah, and just again, you've also spoken about sort of speakers and their content, but what about sort of anything that they have to prepare differently in terms of their sort of setup at home, or anything in addition to just their content and their slides? Was there anything you wanted to add to that?
I mean, yeah, from a production standpoint, I'd really recommend people go watch episode 2 of our webinar series, which was with myself and our production genius Fabio at Live Group, and Fabio gave a really nice and easy walkthrough about what speakers need in their home environment in order to deliver good presentations. I think there are a few like very quick wins, like, hey, pick a reasonably quiet room, or at least one that you won't be disturbed or you won't risk being distracted. If you have a good webcam, a good microphone, those are pretty key these days, although I am mindful that certainly if you look on Amazon, you look in some of the tech places, there is a great shortage worldwide on a lot of webcams and microphones. So it might be a case of using what you have, or talk to a partner who has some stuff in stock so they can get it out to you. It's factoring things like lighting. So both actually all 3 of us here are under artificial lighting. We're not relying on natural daylight. We've obviously got green screens behind us which are projecting these backgrounds. Now, all of those are very much nice to haves. Really, the main thing for most audiences is that they can hear people clearly, and that's quite key. And the rest of it is really just a production layer. So there are some quick tips for speakers to get involved with. I think if you're a speaker and you're worried about an upcoming session, one, talk to your planner, because they can advise you better, because they'll be using particular systems that may be able to leverage certain tech to make it better. Obviously, things like Teams and Zooms do backgrounds without green screen and stuff like that. So yeah, take the quick wins, but sometimes it's just about working with what you have and making it as best as it can possibly be.
Great, thanks. Toby, you mentioned a lot about our digital twin offering in your talk. What can't be done with a digital twin? And Bruce, I'll open this up to you after, but I just wanted to hear Toby's thoughts on this.
Thanks, Katie. I think it is human instinct to meet in the physical form, And I don't think in any shape or form that we are saying that won't happen again. In fact, we are encouraging it to happen. And when it does happen, I think the digital twin will allow there to be better content and more quality touch points in the physical event, and allow delegates to engage with what they want, how they want, and when they want it. The limitations of a digital twin are very, very small indeed. I think the one area where we're having, let's say, the most complex discussions with clients about a digital twin sitting aside their event is where people are celebrating success. And I've mentioned this before. And this is where you're having award ceremonies and people are coming together to celebrate their industry or their peers. And at some of the very large awards, the last event I was at was the M&IT Awards. It's going to be pretty difficult to replicate that feeling in the room and that ability to network with others in that dynamic. However, we've worked on quite a few internal award ceremonies, both for government and corporate. And when we've gone through Bruce's questions to them, we found that the absolute nub of what the objective of that event is behaviour change. It is to showcase some excellent things that have been happening within that organisation to the rest of the people there and get them celebrated. And now that can be done in new and exciting ways. And actually, the digital twin can be brought in to have those excellent bits of work promoted way before whatever event you're going to run actually happens. So you're able to create that behaviour change program over a number of months rather than just the awards ceremony at your company do. So there are limitations, but then again, there are so many areas where the digital twin enhances the event itself.
Great. Anything to add from you, Bruce?
I think we're thinking about a few different things. I think one of them is very much like the virtual event. And yes, there are limitations to the virtual event. It is a digital first approach. It involves streams, it involves tech layers, it involves all those myriad things. You lose out on the face-to-face element. There are things that really suit that approach, that way of working, and there are things that do not. The digital twin is in addition to that. Digital twin planning is to look at a physical event and to say, okay, how do we build digital layers into this in order to make it more robust, more accessible, more all-encompassing in terms of its content, in terms of its purpose, in terms of its objectives. And so to use kind of Toby's analogy, a good digital twin award ceremony, and we have to imagine a future post-COVID because this is a change that is happening. Toby said at the start, this is the new normal. It's not going anywhere. But that post-COVID awards ceremony, you still have your physical experience. You still have people potentially coming to these awards. But then you're broadcasting them to a wider set. Maybe you've got a community hub where people are getting to engage with the nominees for a longer period of time. Maybe we can make a bigger deal out of rewarding and recognizing people. So in principle, if an event can do it, not only can a digital twin do it, but a digital twin can and should enhance it. Yes, virtual events have limitations. I think they're really good. We've spoken a lot about them and in terms of their positives and their negatives, and what we would do them, what we wouldn't do with them. However, digital twin planning is not necessarily about that. It's more all-encompassing, it's more robust, and it allows people to have a lot more freedom in terms of the events they run and when they can start planning to run them.
Great, thank you. So another question we've had is, how far in advance shall we open registration for a virtual event? I'm just going to talk really quickly on this one before I hand it over to the guys. But I think as far in advance as you really want to, and as much time as you have, could be really beneficial. And it really depends on what you're trying to do pre-event in terms of engaging your audience. Bruce mentioned earlier the video that we've just uploaded onto our YouTube channel, which gives you a demo of our virtual event hub that we've built. And within that virtual event hub, you have so many opportunities to engage your audience. They've got heaps of opportunities to network with each other, to speak to your speak to their speakers, And that in turn obviously helps shape your agenda if that's not fully formed yet as well. So I think if you can open up registration and open up your virtual event hub sort of 2, 3, 4 months ahead of your virtual event taking place, then you can really see the benefits of the networking elements, which obviously Bruce mentioned. You do lose that in a digital twin, but we can do it in a virtual environment.
I mean, I can add a little bit to that, which is, hey, the fun of delays. It's okay. I'll charge ahead. I think, like echoing that point is this idea of, if you have something for people to do, then absolutely open it up sooner. You know, there are some people who have registration platforms which are very much just, hey, we have this platform. We want you to get signed up because we're running a virtual event over these days. We don't have much for you to do pre-event. And I think that's a bad idea, but there are some people who want to run events that way, and you can have registration very close to the event date there. If you have meaningful things for them to do, meaningful things for them to get involved with, then you should forge ahead and do it and get people registered sooner. I do tend to be mindful of obviously business realities, that people may only get the go-ahead to run a digital twin strategy or a virtual event with only a month or two before it's all slated to take place, because that's when the approvals came in. I think when you're in that scenario, it's how can you maximize the engagement with the time you have available, and how can you be realistic in terms of what you can expect people to do in that time. If you only have 2 weeks, you probably won't be able to build up a community over that period of time in a meaningful way, but you will still enable them to get involved with content, to leave short messages, to maybe start a little bit of that pre-event networking. So it is a factor. Obviously, if you have things for them to do, more time is better. It's not always possible, and then you have to just change plans. That's why flexibility in digital twin planning comes from.
Great, thanks. So one really interesting question that's coming is about gamification and how we use this to keep people interested. Do we see it as an event essential? If not, how do we keep audiences close to their monitors and engaged? Bruce, I think this might be a really good one for you to answer.
Yeah, I can take it for a start. I know Toby has a few key thoughts about gamification, so I'll throw it to him afterwards. I think it depends on your audience in terms of how you gamify it. So you have a typical cohort of some events are quite competitive people. Gamification might be a really nice tool for them. It's that idea of, hey, it's a leaderboard. I want to be at the top of it. I want to collect these points. I want to kind of stamp my message or my virtual presence on this event in some way. And for those people, it's great. There are people who do not like gamification. And I think, or I certainly worry that the industry's approach to gamification is a little bit like how it's been to networking. Katie, I know you wrote a very good piece on our website, which I should encourage people to read, about actually who's interested in networking. And for most events, it's only about 50% of the audience. My guess is that for gamification, it's probably about the same. That, hey, there is a cohort of people that are really engaged by it, that really want to get involved, that love the idea of gaining points or climbing that leaderboard or seeing that they get achievements for the more that they engage. And there are some people that utterly despise it, and they feel like they're under surveillance. They feel like they're being watched at all times, and that they maybe want to explore things at their own pace, and a gamified element is pushing them forward. That's not a fun situation to be in. So yes, use it, and depending on your audience, it may be very appropriate, it may not be appropriate. It is not a panacea for getting perfect engagement all the time. It has to be worked and built in. And maybe if you don't want to do individual gamification, maybe there's something you can do collaboratively. So you have teams competing against each other as opposed to individuals. There's a lot you can play within that space and a lot you can deploy. But it like any tool, it has its positives as well as its negatives. So you have to bear those in mind when you're thinking about building them in. And fundamentally, the thinking that underpins those decisions about whether you would use gamification goes back to what you know about your audience and what they want.
Toby, anything from you?
Yeah, I would only add that just enhancing what Bruce has said, if you look at your audience, I mean, we run events, student inductions, for example, and it would seem that the majority of those young people actually quite enjoy the gamification aspects that we put into our hubs. I think when you're dealing with more senior people who are time poor, then you should probably think more carefully about exactly what type of gamification you put in. What I would say is if you are adding a level of gamification, take what Bruce has said. If 50% of your audience are involved with that and are very eager to generate points and look at things and achieve stuff, don't think that the 50% who aren't doing that, who aren't interested in it, are not necessarily interested in your content. They are. They're just not interested in the point system or the gamification. So if you are going to deploy something like that, you need other measurement techniques to see whether people are actually watching your activities pre-event and during event, they're engaging, and don't just use the gamification to measure that in its entirety.
Yeah, some really good points. Thank you. We've had a couple of questions in about sponsors and sponsorship packages, and how to satisfy sponsor needs and requirements, whether that's through ROI other than data, and sort of obviously in light of them not having a physical audience, how do they engage with people? So Bruce, I don't know if you've got any comments about that.
Yes, I'm aware that people probably get sick of hearing my voice talk about the sponsorship piece, and I think for me there are many things that you want to do with sponsors in a good digital twin training. So let's take again that two digital twin. Let's say we've got sponsors and exhibitors, and those sponsors and exhibitors have a defined physical presence at the physical event. Brilliant. What we need to look at is what are they getting from that. So, for example, with an exhibition space, it's going to be, hey, there's an area where people can get close, they see our brand, they engage with some bits of content, they maybe talk to someone, and then they take a defined next step. Now, maybe that next step is they grab a business card or they grab a brochure and take it away with them. All of that is stuff that we can transpose to the virtual environment really easily. So we have a dedicated area, we brand it up, we make sure we have like videos, pride of place, easy explainers that digital delegates can engage with quickly, get a sense of that sponsor, that exhibitor, what they're saying. And then, hey, if they want to organize a chat, maybe they want to organize a live chat as opposed to a face-to-face chat. Some people really like face-to-face talk. Some people would prefer like your Amazon returns. Hey, I just want to type something, get some quick information. I'm more comfortable with that. You enable that, and then you provide them a next step zone. So if it's like, if a sponsor exhibitor wants someone to check out a website or book in with a meeting with them, you use that to provide a very signposted way for a delegate to say, okay, this is what's next, and if I'm interested, here's the button I click. Back to that video on the live group YouTube page, that shows certainly our view, our vision of what good sponsorship and exhibitor management is. Live group events on YouTube, watch it, and it shows all of that functionality. It's really useful. But Toby, I know you've been talking a lot to sponsors and engaging with them directly in order to allay their fears. I'm wondering if you want to give a bit more kind of background and context to that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm dealing with a lot of clients whose whole event program and their entire revenue comes from key sponsors and exhibition sales at their physical events. And I think they're the initial people that came to us and started talking to us about the digital twin. And I think, just not saying anything you've already said, Bruce, where I think we add value on top of the kind of the architecture we put around it, is we will talk at length to your sponsors. We'll show them exactly what that event will look like, and show them that actually what we're delivering is an event that happens over a much longer period of time with a much broader range of content, and that the sponsors predominantly can actually engage with those delegates and run almost mini events, if they like, in the post-event portal, getting the people that they want to get to interested in their topic and their content, and actually helping deliver more insightful content at the event itself. And of course, you're going from a traditional event format to an event format with a digital twin sitting around it, I say you potentially, moving forward, should be actually asking your sponsors and exhibitor for more money. And if there is not a physical element, then they're not going to have to pay for an exhibition stand and people to be on site for 1 or 2 or 3 days. So they're saving money and getting their message to more people over a longer period of time. I mean, it's win-win and win if you think about it that way.
It's an interesting concept. So potentially charging more, their overheads are less, and like I say, everyone wins.
Yeah.
Bruce, we've had an interesting question about millennials. Obviously, they're becoming our main audience. So how are we changing the way that content is delivered in a suite of digital tools as well to make it snappy and shorter for them to engage with and watch?
Yeah, and I think it's not even millennials. It's probably Gen Z now. I mean, I'm a millennial. I'm certainly not feeling young and up and coming in things anymore. It is very much Gen Z who are more used to digital tech. They're more used to digital communities. That is an environment that they are entirely comfortable within. I think millennials have been a bit of a bridge gap between Gen X and this new Gen Z. And I think certainly in terms of how you plan and think about content, it is about making things punchier. It's about your half-day events. It's about managing time effectively. It's about not necessarily falling into the cliches, though. We can make some pretty wide assumptions about millennials and Gen Z, and actually pretty much any generation type. But that's all they are, is their assumptions. And what we need to do is engage with them directly and rebuild our understanding up. One of the things I think is always, I found a little bit of a curiosity with events is typically you have your event content program set, and then you manage registration, and then you deliver it. And part of me almost wishes for a future where we put out the key thinking behind the event of like, hey, this is an event about X. And then you run registration, and a key part of that registration is to ask delegates' interests, to ask the kind of topics they're interested in, maybe even to ask like, hey, how much time do you want to devote to this? How much time is an ideal session for you? Some really quite pertinent and punchy questions, and then use that data to inform how the actual event is structured itself. And that for me is key. I think the main thing that we're going to see that is probably a pure generational divide and should just be one of comfort is the fact that, hey, these younger generations who are now becoming our mainline delegates, they don't have the hang-ups of previous generations. They are much more affair with technology. They are much more happy engaging remotely. And I think we're going to come out of the COVID-19 pandemic thinking, hey, pretty much everyone's had a real crash course in how to use this stuff. They're going to know what a good event is. They're going to know what a bad event is. And we should leverage that in order to deliver better content going forward. We cannot return to the way things have been. I know that's been a message Toby's echoed, but I'm going to echo it now, because if you're an event planner and you're going to come out of COVID-19 running events the way you always have, no one is going to attend. Simple as that.
Great, thank you. And I think that's a really, really good place for us to finish. Thank you for all the questions that you've submitted, but unfortunately we have run out of time. You'll see just underneath our screen that the Q&A box has now actually changed to a few evaluation questions. Please do take a few moments just to answer these. They're really, really helpful for us to have your feedback. Bruce has mentioned audience feedback already. It helps us shape our future webinars into actually what you want to hear about. If you can't see the evaluation questions, just refresh your page and hopefully they should appear. During episode 5, we'll be exploring the digital twin in a lot more detail. We've spoken about it during our previous 2 webinars, and now we want to make it real for you. We'll be talking through how it looks, how it feels for planners, speakers, and your audience. To sign up for episode 5, taking place on Thursday the 14th of May at 11 a.m, head to livegroup.co.uk/sign up. Thanks so much for watching, and hopefully we look forward to seeing you again very soon.